March 11, 1943. Harlan Steelworks, Gary, Indiana. 2:47 p.m. Safety Inspector Thaddeus Caldwell stood by the shattered guardrail of furnace number 3 and looked at what remained of Delmar Whitlock. They'd covered the body with canvas tarp, but the shape underneath was wrong. Too flat. Unnatural. Near the toe of a work boot, a dark puddle had congealed on the concrete. Thaddeus was 35 years old, and in 12 years working at Harlan Steel, he'd seen plenty. Severe burns, compound fractures, fingers taken by machinery. But today, for the first time, he understood what real fear meant. Not fear for himself, fear of what he knew and what he'd have to do with that knowledge. The choice between his conscience and his survival, between the document he was expected to sign and the document that told what actually happened. He didn't yet know this choice would stretch across 7 years, that the original accident report, hidden in the wall of his office behind the steam radiator, would wait like a timed charge, and that when the moment came, the price of truth would be more terrible than he could imagine. To understand how Thaddeus Caldwell arrived at this choice, you need to go back several hours, to the moment when the shift was just beginning and nobody yet knew that today would be the last day for a 28-year-old poor man. Thaddeus arrived at the steelworks at 6 in the morning, like always. March in Gary was brutal. Outside a snowstorm, temperature hovering around 0 Fahrenheit, wind off Lake Michigan cutting through wool coats like they were tissue paper. But inside the plant it was always hot. The blast furnaces ran around the clock, temperatures inside reaching 3,000 degrees. Steel melted, flowed in fiery rivers, cooled in molds, becoming rails, I-beams, tank hulls, artillery shells. Harlan Steel was the pride of Indiana, a flagship of American industrial might, a plant that roared across the nation with record production figures and exceeded war production quotas month after month. But those figures had another side that never appeared in the newspapers. Equipment was worn out. Some furnaces were more than 30 years old. Safety rails needed replacement. Cooling systems ran at their limits. Ventilation couldn't keep up. Thaddeus knew this. Every month he wrote memos, demanded funding, insisted on repairs. The answer was always the same. Production comes first. Repairs mean downtime. Downtime means missing quotas. Missing quotas means the end of management careers and lost bonuses for workers. And in wartime, it meant letting down the boys fighting overseas, giving aid and comfort to Hitler and Tojo. Thaddeus was a slight, wiry man with tired gray eyes and lips pressed into a permanent line. Hard times had taken his father when Thaddeus was 4 years old. The old man had simply left one morning looking for work and never returned. Another casualty of economic hardship in those difficult years before the Great War. His mother, Constance May, worked as a seamstress in a garment factory, raised her son alone, working 16-hour days. Thaddeus was a quiet, diligent boy. He did well in school, didn't drink, didn't get into fights. After high school, he went to Purdue on a partial scholarship, graduated with honors in mechanical engineering, got hired at Harlan Steel. He married Vera, a schoolteacher with a gentle disposition and kind eyes. They had 2 children, Walter, age 10, and Dorothy, age 7. An ordinary American family. A modest 2-bedroom house with a front porch, a Philco radio, an icebox. On Sundays, they went to church. Summers, they visited Vera's parents on their farm in Terre Haute. A quiet, predictable life where everything had its place. But at work, Thaddeus was different. Here he felt responsibility, heavy as a steel ingot. Every worker who entered the plant floor trusted him with their life. Every shift could end in tragedy if he didn't inspect, didn't check, didn't stop things. His title sounded impressive, Safety Inspector, Sector 3. But in reality, he was alone in his fight against a system that placed tons of steel production above human lives. Wendell Rutherford Brackett, foreman of the 3rd blast furnace section, was Thaddeus's complete opposite. A large man, ruddy-faced, with a booming voice and a habit of slapping people on the shoulder hard enough to make them stagger. He was 48 and had worked his way up from ladle handler to foreman. A Bronze Star from the last war, 2 civilian commendations, a certificate of appreciation from the War Production Board. In his office hung a board with photographs of top producers, pictures with state officials, pennants for exceeding production quotas. Brackett was a company man through and through. He believed in production figures, in quotas, in the idea that the end justified the means. For him, workers weren't people but units of production, cogs in the machinery of winning the war. That morning, Thaddeus walked through the plant floor with his clipboard, checking guardrails, inspecting crane cables, testing warning lights. At Furnace 3, he stopped. The safety barrier around the trough where molten steel flowed was damaged. 2 sections of metal grating were missing. In their place, someone had strung a rope with red warning flags. Thaddeus frowned. He checked the maintenance log. Entry from 2 days ago. __quote _0 __. Thaddeus knew there was no new barrier at the supply depot. He'd requisitioned it 3 months ago. The response? Funds not allocated. Try next quarter. Meanwhile, workers walked within 3 feet of flowing molten metal, separated from it by nothing but rope and red cloth. Thaddeus found Brackett in his office. The foreman sat at his desk studying production reports. Mr. Brackett, Furnace 3 has no barrier. We need to halt operations until we install at least a temporary guard. Brackett looked up, irritation in his eyes. Caldwell, we've got quotas. 20 days left in the month and we're 300 tons behind. If we stop now, we won't meet the War Production Board targets. Mr. Brackett, there are men working there. One wrong step. Our men aren't idiots, Brackett cut him off. They see the flags, don't they? They see them, so they'll be careful. And you, Thaddeus, let's not create panic over nothing. Do your job and everything will be fine. Thaddeus wanted to argue, but Brackett had already returned to his paperwork. The conversation was over. Thaddeus left the office with a heavy feeling in his chest. He knew he should insist, demand, go higher up to plant management. But he also knew how that would end. They'd label him a troublemaker, someone who didn't understand production necessity. They could demote him, transfer him to another section. Worst case, terminate his employment for insubordination. And he had 2 children, a mortgage, a mother who depended on the $20 he sent her each month. He returned to the plant floor, found the shift supervisor, Rufus Oswald, a weathered older worker with sun-damaged skin. Rufus, at Furnace 3, be extra vigilant. No barrier, but work continues. Tell the boys to keep clear of the trough. Rufus nodded. Understood, Mr. Caldwell. I'll pass it along. Thaddeus went to his office. He sat at his desk, opened his logbook, and made an entry. March 11th, 1943. Blast Furnace 3. Safety barrier absent. Operations continuing per verbal order from Foreman Brackett. Warned shift supervisor of elevated hazard. He closed the book and looked out the window. Outside, snow swirled between the plant buildings, turning the world into white chaos. Somewhere inside, Thaddeus felt unease, a dull, anxious premonition. He tried to shake it off, told himself it was just fatigue, nerves. But the feeling wouldn't leave. The accident happened at 2:43 p.m. Thaddeus was in the adjacent building at that moment, inspecting emergency lighting systems. He heard a sound, not an explosion, but something else. A dull impact, then screaming. He ran. The plant corridors were long, drafty, smelling of machine oil and iron. Thaddeus ran, pushing through doors, his heart pounding harder because the screaming was getting louder, more desperate. When he burst into the 3rd furnace section, a crowd had already gathered. Workers clustered around Furnace 3. Someone was yelling, someone running for stretchers. Thaddeus pushed forward and saw. Delmar Whitlock, a young poorman, lay on the concrete floor. A crucible filled with molten steel, weighing 3 tons and controlled by an overhead crane, had come loose. The cable snapped. The crucible fell, tipped, and molten metal poured where it shouldn't have. Delmar had been standing too close to the trough. Where there should have been a barrier, there was only rope with red flags. He'd stepped back, stumbled, fell. What happened next was something no one should have to witness. Someone covered what remained with canvas. Delmar Whitlock was gone. The men standing around looked pale, shaken. Some turned away. This was the kind of accident that haunted you forever. Brackett appeared 10 minutes later. His face was ashen, but his voice was steady. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 9, underscore, underscore. Thaddeus followed the foreman like walking through a dream. His legs moved on their own. His brain refused to function. Before his eyes, the image of that canvas-covered form, all wrong, forever burned into his memory. In the office, Brackett closed the door, pulled a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer, poured 2 glasses. He drank his in one gulp, gestured to the second. Quote 10, quote? Thaddeus shook his head. Quote 11, quote? Quote 12, quote. Thaddeus drank. The whiskey burned his throat, momentarily distracted him from the nightmare. Brackett sat heavily, ran a hand over his face. Quote 13. Quote 14, Thaddeus said quietly. Quote 15. Quote Brackett's eyes hardened. You warned me. I remember. But let's be clear about what happened here. That crane cable was inspected last month. Certified sound. It shouldn't have failed. This was equipment failure, not a safety violation. But if the barrier had been in place, maybe he wouldn't have been there. Or maybe he would. Point is, the primary cause was the cable. And there's something else. Brackett leaned forward. Whitlock had 2 disciplinary warnings this year. One for drinking on shift, one for horseplay near hot metal. He was reckless. Everyone knew it. That's exactly what the accident report will say. Equipment failure compounded by worker negligence. No mention of missing barriers because that's not what killed him. The falling crucible killed him. Brackett pulled out a form, the official Harlan Steel accident report template. You're going to write this up. Equipment failure, worker negligence, recommendations for stricter cable inspection protocols. Clean. Simple. We file it, compensate the widow, move on. I can't write that. It's not the whole truth. It's true enough. The cable did fail. Whitlock was careless. Those are facts. The missing barrier is also a fact. A fact that doesn't need to be in this report. Thaddeus, listen to me carefully. If you put that missing barrier in the report, this becomes a safety violation. Federal investigation. War Production Board holds up all our contracts. Plant could be shut down for weeks. That's thousands of tons of steel not reaching the Pacific Theater. That's ships not built, tanks not assembled. That's American boys dying because we couldn't do our jobs here. Is that what you want? I don't want to lie. It's not a lie. It's emphasis. We emphasize what matters most. Equipment failure. We don't obscure the record with details about a temporary barrier removal that wasn't the direct cause. Thaddeus looked at the form. His hand trembled. What if there's another accident? What if someone else? There won't be. I'll have that barrier installed tomorrow. I'll find the funds somehow. This was a freak occurrence, Thaddeus. Bad luck, bad timing. But we can learn from it without destroying this plant and everyone who works here. Brackett slid the form across the desk. Write the report. Do your duty to this country. Or refuse, and watch 2,000 men lose their jobs when the feds shut us down. Thaddeus picked up the pen. His fingers felt numb. He started writing. Equipment failure. Cable snapped without warning. Worker Delmar E. Whitlock positioned too close to pour trough despite warnings from shift supervisor. Recommendations. Increase cable inspection frequency. Reinforce worker safety training. He signed it. Thaddeus M. Caldwell, Safety Inspector. Brackett took the form, glanced at it, nodded. Good man. This stays between us. The truth is in that report. Equipment failed. Worker was careless. That's what happened. Thaddeus stood to leave. "One more thing," Brackett said. "I know this is difficult, but you made the right choice. For the plant, for the war effort, for everyone. You're a patriot, Thaddeus. Don't ever doubt that." Thaddeus walked out. The word patriot echoed in his head like a curse. That night, alone in his office, Thaddeus pulled out a fresh accident report form. He wrote everything. The missing barrier, his warning to Brackett that morning, the decision to continue operations despite the hazard, the rope with red flags that replaced proper guarding, the cable failure that caused the crucible to fall, Delmar Whitlock's death because multiple failures converged. He signed this report too. Then he folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and hid it behind the steam radiator in his office. There was a loose brick in the wall there, a small cavity behind it. He pushed the envelope deep inside, replaced the brick. He didn't know why he did this. Maybe because someday the truth would matter. Maybe because he couldn't live with himself if there was no record at all. Maybe because it was the only act of resistance he could manage. Delmar Whitlock's funeral was held 4 days later. Closed casket. His widow, Lorene, 26 years old with an infant daughter, cried throughout the service. She accepted the widow's compensation check, $300, enough for maybe 6 months if she was careful. The union representative spoke about workplace safety, about holding management accountable. But nothing came of it. The official report was filed. Equipment failure and worker error. Case closed. Thaddeus attended the funeral. He stood in the back, couldn't bear to look at Lorene or the baby. After the service, Rufus Oswald approached him. "That barrier," Rufus said quietly. "It should have been there." "I know. We all know. But we also know speaking up means losing our jobs. And in times like these, a job's worth more than truth." Thaddeus said nothing. What could he say? Life went on. The barrier was installed at Furnace 3, quietly, without fanfare. Production continued. Harlan Steel met its quotas, exceeded them. The war ground on. In newsreels, they showed factories churning out tanks, planes, ships, the arsenal of democracy. Nobody mentioned the men who died keeping the machinery running. Thaddeus changed after that day. Vera noticed, but didn't understand. He became distant, withdrawn. He'd sit at the dinner table staring at his plate, hardly eating. At night, he'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat. She'd ask what was wrong. He'd say nothing. Bad dreams. Walter and Dorothy noticed too. Their father, who used to play catch in the backyard, read them stories, take them fishing on weekends, became a shadow. Present, but absent. He'd smile at them, mechanically, but the light had gone out of his eyes. Work became unbearable. Every day at the plant, Thaddeus saw that canvas-covered form in his mind. Every inspection he conducted felt like a lie. He'd write up violations, and management would ignore them or classify them as __, quote _40 __. He'd see hazards and know, absolutely know, that someday someone else would die. In November 1943, there was a near miss at Furnace 2. A pour spilled, came within feet of 2 workers. Pure luck saved them. Thaddeus wrote it up, marked it critical. Brackett called him in. "You're becoming a problem, Caldwell. These exaggerated reports are creating unnecessary alarm. The War Production Board thinks we're running a death trap here. Tone it down." People almost died. But they didn't. Almost doesn't count. Write up actual incidents, not hypotheticals. By then, it's too late. That's not your decision to make. Your job is to document, not to dictate policy. Remember that. Thaddeus remembered. He remembered that his job was to watch men work in dangerous conditions and write reports nobody read. In January 1944, he requested a transfer. To the day shift, different sector, anywhere. Request denied. Safety inspectors couldn't be shuffled around arbitrarily. They needed sector-specific knowledge. He was stuck. In March 1944, exactly 1 year after Delmar Whitlock's death, Thaddeus had a breakdown. He was home, sitting in the living room, and suddenly he couldn't breathe. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, his hands shook uncontrollably. Vera called Dr. Hemsworth, who came and diagnosed nervous exhaustion. Prescribed rest, possibly a leave of absence. Thaddeus took 2 weeks off. He spent them sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. Neighbors would wave, ask how he was feeling. He'd nod, say fine. He wasn't fine. He was falling apart. When he returned to work, he was a shell. He did his job, mechanically, without passion or resistance. He stopped writing up violations unless they were egregious and undeniable. He learned to look the other way. It was easier. It hurt less. The alternative was madness. The war ended in August 1945. VJ Day, celebrations in the streets, everyone jubilant. Thaddeus watched the parades from his porch, unable to feel joy. The war was over. Production quotas would ease. Maybe things would improve. They didn't. Harlan Steel shifted from war production to peacetime manufacturing. Different products, same pressures. Profits instead of quotas. Corners cut in the name of shareholder returns instead of national survival. The language changed. The reality didn't. In March 1950, Thaddeus was 42 years old and looked 60. His hair had gone completely gray. His face was gaunt. He'd developed a stomach ulcer, chronic insomnia. He was drinking, not heavily but steadily. A glass of whiskey every night to sleep. Sometimes 2. Vera tried to help. She'd cook his favorite meals, suggest they take a vacation, see a different doctor. Nothing worked. She didn't know what was wrong. How could she? He'd never told her. Never told anyone. In June 1950, management announced a major modernization project. New furnaces, updated safety systems, better ventilation. It would take 3 years and cost millions. During the transition, production would continue in the old sections with minimal upgrades. In other words, the dangerous equipment would keep running while they built the new facility. Thaddeus saw it coming like watching a train wreck in slow motion. October 15, 1950, Furnace 5. A steam line ruptured during a pour. Superheated steam at 400 degrees filled the work area. 3 men were caught in the blast. What happened to them was mercifully quick, but the aftermath was devastating. Thaddeus wrote the report. Steam line had been flagged for replacement in 1947. Work order never executed. Classified as quote 46 __. He included all of that. He signed it. He sent it up the chain. 2 days later, he was called to the plant manager's office. Not Brackett anymore. Brackett had been promoted to operations director. Now it was Sterling Horace Blackwood, a younger man, Ivy League educated, sharp as a razor. Mr. Caldwell, this report is unacceptable. You're suggesting management negligence caused this accident. I'm documenting facts. The steam line was known to be defective. Known to maintenance, not to management. There's a distinction. And your report language is inflammatory. You use words like negligence and preventable. Those aren't engineering terms. Those are legal accusations. They're also accurate. Truth is a matter of interpretation. The accident occurred due to catastrophic equipment failure. The line was scheduled for replacement next quarter. The timing was unfortunate. That's the accurate characterization. 3 men are dead. Yes, and their families will be compensated. But destroying this company with litigation won't bring them back. Rewrite this report. Stick to engineering facts. Leave out the editorializing. I won't. Blackwood's expression hardened. Quote 55 Thaddeus rewrote the report. Catastrophic equipment failure. Maintenance scheduled for next quarter. Tragic timing. Recommendations for accelerated steam line replacement schedule. That night, he wrote the real report. All the details. The maintenance request from 1947. The budget decisions that deferred the work. The three names. Caspar Drummond, Herbert Lyle, Owen Fletcher. Men who died because money was more important than their lives. He sealed this report, took it home, hid it in his attic in a metal box with the envelope from behind the radiator at work. 2 documents now. 2 pieces of buried truth. The nightmares intensified. Now it wasn't just Delmar Whitlock. Now there were 3 more men, silent witnesses to his failure. In November 1950, Thaddeus tried to quit. He gave his 2 weeks' notice, said he needed to pursue other opportunities. Blackwood wouldn't accept it. You're too valuable. We're implementing the new safety protocols for the modernization. We need your expertise. I'm offering you a promotion. Senior Safety Director, 20% salary increase. I don't want it. Consider your family, your children. Walter's 17 now, college-bound. Dorothy's 14. Education costs money. Think about their future. Thaddeus thought about it. He withdrew his resignation. The promotion came through. New office, larger, better view. Same job, more responsibility. More reports to write, more truth to bury. The modernization project continued through 1951, 1952. The new furnaces were impressive, state-of-the-art safety systems, automated controls, proper ventilation. When they came online in early 1953, everyone marveled at the progress. Harlan Steel, a modern marvel of American industry. But the old section still ran. And on February 8, 1953, disaster struck again. Furnace 8, a ladle of molten metal being transported by overhead crane. The crane support structure had been flagged for inspection 6 months earlier. The inspection had been postponed 4 times due to __quote_59__. The structure failed. The crane collapsed. The ladle, containing 8 tons of molten steel, fell into the work area. 11 men died. Not all at once. Some died at the scene. Others made it to the hospital but succumbed to their injuries over the next 72 hours. The devastation was complete. Thaddeus was called to the scene. He looked at the twisted metal, the scorch marks on the floor, the tools dropped where men had stood. The bodies had already been removed, but the evidence of the tragedy was everywhere. He was 45 years old. He'd been at Harlan Steel for 22 years. He'd written countless reports, filed hundreds of safety recommendations. He'd buried 2 truths behind radiators and in attic boxes. And now 11 more men were dead. Blackwood called him in. This is a catastrophe. Federal investigators are coming. The company's liability exposure is enormous. We need your full cooperation, Thaddeus. My cooperation? The crane structure failed due to metal fatigue. Unforeseen, unpreventable. The inspection schedule was appropriate. This was essentially an act of God. Your report needs to reflect that. It was preventable. That structure should have been inspected months ago. The inspection was on the schedule, but never executed. Due to operational constraints, which is not negligence, which is unfortunate timing. Thaddeus, 11 families are going to sue us. The company could be destroyed. Thousands of jobs lost. Your job lost. Is that what you want? What I want is for people to stop dying. Then help me prevent the next deaths. If this company goes under, workers go to other plants with worse safety records. More people die. But if we survive this, implement the safety reforms, expand the modernization, then those 11 deaths will have meant something. They'll have purchased a safer future. But only if we survive the lawsuits. Only if you write the report that gives us a chance. Thaddeus looked at Blackwood. The man was eloquent, persuasive, and utterly shameless. I'll write your report, Thaddeus said quietly. Metal fatigue, unforeseen failure, Act of God. Thank you. But I'll also write the real one. I beg your pardon? I'll write what actually happened, and I'll keep it as insurance. If another accident like this happens, that report goes to the federal authorities. All of them. Every buried truth. Blackwood's face went pale. Quote 75, quote 76. Blackwood stared at him. Then, slowly, he nodded. Quote 77, quote. Thaddeus wrote 2 reports. The official one went into the company files. The real one went into his attic box with the others. The families sued. Harlan Steel settled out of court. Significant sums, confidential amounts, non-disclosure agreements. The modernization project was accelerated. By 1955, the old furnaces were decommissioned. Safety records improved dramatically. Accident rates dropped to historic lows. Thaddeus Caldwell remained at Harlan Steel until 1958. By then, he was 50 years old and completely exhausted. He took early retirement, a reduced pension, but enough to live on. Walter was in college, Dorothy working as a secretary. They were independent. He could leave. His last day at the plant, nobody threw him a party. He'd become unpopular over the years. The man who wrote up violations, who refused to compromise. Management tolerated him because his reports were technically sound, but nobody liked him. He was the conscience nobody wanted. He cleared out his office, found the loose brick behind the radiator. The envelope was gone. He'd moved it to the attic years ago, but seeing the empty space felt prophetic. Hidden truths don't stay hidden forever. They just wait. Retirement was supposed to be peaceful. It wasn't. Thaddeus spent his days at home, helping Vera with housework, playing with his granddaughter Emily, Walter's daughter. The girl was bright, curious. She loved her grandfather, would sit on his lap and ask him to tell stories. He'd tell her fairy tales, stories from his childhood, but never about the steelworks. In 1961, Walter was killed in a car accident. Drunk driver, head-on collision, instant. Thaddeus and Vera buried their son. Emily came to live with them. Walter's wife had passed away during Emily's birth years earlier. The loss of Walter broke something in Thaddeus. He'd saved Walter once, by keeping quiet, by keeping his job. And now Walter was gone anyway. All that moral compromise, all that buried truth, for nothing. In 1965, Dorothy married and moved to California. She rarely visited. The distance wasn't just geographic. She'd never understood her father's sadness, his remoteness. She felt he'd never really been present for her childhood. She wasn't wrong. In 1969, Vera had a stroke. Mild but frightening. She recovered mostly, but was never quite the same. Slower, more forgetful. Thaddeus became her caretaker, helped her with daily tasks, managed her medications. It was his penance, he felt. All those years she'd stood by him, and now he could stand by her. In 1973, Harlan Steel had another accident. Not at the modernized sections, those were safe. But in a warehouse, a forklift operator seriously injured a maintenance worker. The worker survived but lost both legs. Thaddeus read about it in the newspaper. He went to his attic, opened the metal box, looked at his 3 hidden reports. Delmar Whitlock, 1943. The 3 steam victims, 1950. The 11 men at Furnace 8, 1953. 14 deaths. And he'd buried the truth about all of them. He sat on the attic floor, reading his own handwriting from decades ago, and wept. He was 65 years old. Most of his life was behind him, and he'd spent it as a coward. In December 1973, he had his first heart attack. Not severe, but warning enough. The doctor told him, slow down, reduce stress, get his affairs in order. Thaddeus went home, wrote everything down in a journal, the whole story. Every accident, every buried report, every choice he'd made. He wrote it over 3 weeks, filling 100 pages. When he finished, He put the journal in the metal box with the reports, sealed the box, and hid it in the attic crawlspace behind old luggage. Why? He didn't know. Maybe so the truth would exist somewhere, even if nobody ever found it. Maybe so he could feel like he'd done something, however small. Maybe because confession, even to paper, brought a measure of relief. In March 1974, exactly 31 years after Delmar Whitlock's death, Thaddeus stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the March snow. Same month, same weather. Life had come full circle. "Are you all right, dear?" Vera asked from the bed. "Just thinking." About what? About choices. About what we do and what we leave undone. "You did your best, Thaddeus. You always did your best." He smiled at her sadly. She'd always believed in him. She didn't know what his best had actually been. It was better that way. In 1975, Emily graduated from high school. She'd grown into a smart, confident young woman. She wanted to study law, maybe become a civil rights attorney. She talked about justice, about holding powerful people accountable. Thaddeus listened and felt a strange mix of pride and shame. His granddaughter believed in truth and justice. He'd spent his life burying both. In 1978, Vera died, peacefully, in her sleep. A mercy, really. Thaddeus buried her next to Walter. He was 70 years old, alone in the house. Emily visited when she could, but she was busy with her law career in Chicago. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the dark, Thaddeus saw them all. Delmar Whitlock, the 3 steam victims, the 11 men from Furnace 8. They didn't speak, didn't accuse. They just stood and looked at him. And that silent gaze was worse than any words. In 1980, his health deteriorated rapidly. Second heart attack, more serious. A month in the hospital. The doctors prepared him. His time was limited. But he didn't die. He came home, weak, aged beyond his years. He was 72 but looked 90. Dorothy visited once, briefly. She'd become a stranger. They had nothing to say to each other. Emily came more often. She'd sit with him, talk about her cases, about the law, about fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He'd listen and think, "I never fought. I folded every time." In March 1981, Thaddeus asked Emily to bring him the metal box from the attic. She brought it down. He opened it, took out the journal, and read. It took him 3 days, reading slowly, with long pauses. Emily sat with him, held his hand, saw him cry but didn't ask why. When he finished, he looked at her. "Emily, I was a coward." "No, Grandpa." "Yes. I knew the truth and I buried it. 14 men died because I stayed silent. Because I chose my job, my family, my safety over their lives." "You were trying to protect your family." "I was protecting myself. From consequences, from discomfort, from having to be brave." Emily didn't know what to say. She held his hand and they sat in silence. On April 14th, 1981, a Wednesday, Thaddeus Merritt Caldwell died. Quietly, in his sleep, of heart failure. He was 73 years old. The funeral was small. Emily, Dorothy, a few neighbors, some old colleagues from the construction company where he'd worked after retirement. On the headstone, they wrote, "Thaddeus Merritt Caldwell, 1908 to 1981. Beloved husband and father." Nobody wrote, "Man who knew the truth but was afraid to speak it." Nobody wrote, "Engineer who could have prevented tragedy but chose silence." But in his journal, which Emily found in the metal box, it was all there. The whole truth about how the system worked, how it economized on lives, how fear and the desire to protect one's family made good people complicit. Emily read the journal cover to cover. She read it and wept. She hadn't known. All those years she hadn't known what her grandfather carried, what burden he bore. She'd thought he was just sad, burned out from work. Now she understood. She understood why he'd always been distant, why he'd cried out in his sleep, why he'd always seemed so heavy, so weighed down. She wanted to take the journal public, donate it to a historical archive, preserve the story. But then she reconsidered. It was too personal, too painful. She put the journal back in the metal box, put the box in her own attic, let it rest. Maybe someday someone else would find it, read it, understand. Years passed. Harlan Steel continued operating. In the 1990s, it was sold, then sold again. The old sections were demolished. New buildings rose, safety standards improved. Accidents became rare. Progress, of a kind. In 1995, a memorial was erected on the plant grounds, a granite monument with names carved in stone. 14 names. Delmar Whitlock, 1915 to 1943. Casper Drummond, Herbert Lyle, Owen Fletcher, 1950. And 11 more from 1953. Sometimes people came to the memorial, left flowers, relatives, friends, workers who remembered. In 2001, Emily visited the memorial. She was 44 years old, a successful civil rights attorney, married with 2 children. She stood before the stone and placed a bouquet of carnations at its base. Quote, 94, quote, she whispered. Quote, 95, quote. She knew her grandfather wasn't a hero. He hadn't stopped the system, hadn't saved lives. He was an ordinary man caught between conscience and fear, and he chose fear. But he suffered for that choice for the rest of his life, and that suffering was his punishment and his redemption. Emily walked away from the memorial. The sun was setting behind the plant smokestacks, painting the sky orange. Somewhere in the buildings, furnaces roared, steel melted, workers labored. Life continued. And in the old section of the plant, in a building long since rebuilt, there had once been a safety inspector's office. Behind a steam radiator in the wall, there had been a cavity where a document lay hidden, an accident report, a truth that might have changed something. But the document was gone now. Moved to an attic, then to another attic, sealed in a metal box. It still existed, but buried so deep that maybe it would never surface. This story is about the cost of silence and what happens when a system forces people to choose between conscience and survival. Thaddeus Caldwell wasn't a villain. He was a victim of a system that valued production over life. But he was also complicit, because he stayed silent, because he signed false reports, because he buried truth instead of shouting it. 14 people died. Their children grew up without fathers. Their wives aged in loneliness. Their mothers never recovered from grief. And the system kept working, because one person, even knowing the truth, couldn't change it alone. Thaddeus Caldwell lived with that burden for 38 years, from the first accident to his death, and that burden crushed him. Only death freed him. The truth remained buried, in hidden reports, in journals gathering dust in attic boxes, in the memories of the few who knew. Harlan Steel Works still operates today, under a different name, with different ownership. On the granite monument, 14 names. And each name is a reminder that human life cannot be a means to an end. That economizing on safety is not thrift, but crime. That silence is complicity. And that sometimes, one hidden document can cost a dozen lives.